On the 26th of July, 2026, at 1 in the afternoon, rescuers were working on the saddle of Mount Elbrus. They were bringing the dead down from there. 2 had been found by that hour. 3 more were still being searched for, somewhere in that same place, at 5,300 meters under snow that had been falling for 2 days straight. And at that very moment, a new distress call came in from the same saddle. A different group, different people, the same slope, the same weather, and the same rescue team that had no free hands left. 3 weeks before that, the mountain had already taken a climber from St. Petersburg, 34 years old, a commercial tour, guides in the group. 5 days after him, a citizen of Malaysia. He made it to the top and died on the way down. And between them, 7 people from the Bosnian city of Zenica. A doctor, a married couple, 2 serving mountain rescuers. People with years of mountain experience who understood exactly where they were going. They never reached the summit. They turned around earlier by their own decision. 2 of them came back. Elbrus is called the most accessible of the world's great mountains, and that is exactly how it's sold. People bring home photos of themselves standing knee-deep in snow, smiling at the camera. There's a working cable car, and higher up the slope, snowcats run, and every single year, people die here, and the rescue squad goes out onto those slopes more often than once every 3 days. This is the story of what happened on this mountain in July 2026, and of why the people who die here most often are the ones who did everything by the book and simply turned back a few hours later than the weather allowed. Elbrus is the highest mountain in Europe. The western summit rises to 5,642 meters, the eastern one to 5,621, the highest point in the Caucasus and on the entire continent, one of the 7 summits, the set that climbers collect all over the world, going up to the highest point of every continent. And it's the only one of the 7 you can travel to on a Friday and be back home by Monday. The classic route from the south has no technical difficulty. There's no rock to climb, no complicated terrain to work through. A cable car lifts you from the village up to Garibashi Station, 3,847 meters, almost 4 kilometers above sea level, without taking a single step on foot. In summer, snowcats run from there. For an extra fee, a machine will drive you up to around 5,100 meters. From there to the summit, a fit person needs 2, maybe 3 hours. In high season, 400 to 500 people head up the mountain every day. Now, for a different column of numbers. In 2025, 18 people died attempting Elbrus. The rescuers of the Elbrus High Mountain Squad ran 127 operations. They brought 159 people down alive, 159 in a single season. These are people who set out on the route and couldn't get back on their own. Not one of them, zipping up a jacket that morning, pictured himself on that list. A weekend mountain keeps an entire squad working without weekends. In July 2026, that squad would have to go up again and again. The hardest call-out of all would come on the night of the 26th to a Bosnian group climbing the classic route from the south. Zenica is an industrial city in central Bosnia, the 4th largest in the country. 7 people from there set out for Elbrus. They had been preparing for months. Almost all of them had experience on peaks above 5,000 meters. Their experience wasn't bought, it was earned. These were active climbers who had been going into the mountains for years, and Elbrus was simply the next step on their list. 2 of them belonged to the Zenica Mountain Rescue Service, which means they did exactly what complete strangers on the other side of Europe would be doing for them a few days later. 3 others were members of the climbing club Vedro. Meliha Chaushevich worked at the Cantonal Hospital in Zenica, a maxillofacial surgeon, a subspecialist in plastic and reconstructive surgery. In October 2025, she climbed Mount Kinabalu in Malaysia, 4,095 meters, and became the first woman from Bosnia and Herzegovina to do it. She had turned 50 that year. Alma and Denis Okanovic were married, and for years they ran a page about their travels. The name of the page was a nod to the 3rd member of their journeys, a cat called Machika, who traveled with them. On the 20th of July, they posted a group photo, all 7 of them in the frame. The caption was short, 1,000 kilometers behind them, 1 summit ahead, and just 1 night's sleep to go. 4 days left until the summit push. The southern slope of Elbrus has a quality you can't read off a map or pick up from someone else's trip report. It looks easier than it is, and it keeps looking that way right to the very end. The route climbs past the Pastuchov Rocks. That's around 4,700 meters, the last stretch where the terrain still reads as terrain. Above that begins the Kosaya Polka, a long traverse running up and to the right, monotonous, with no clear landmarks. Hour after hour, the same picture. Then comes the saddle between the two summits, at about 5,300 meters. And after that begins the part that the tour descriptions don't mention in a single line. Elbrus has drop-offs. They're on the northern and western slopes, sheer faces, real vertical, and nobody wanders in there by mistake. You can see the danger with your own eyes. But the southern and eastern slopes are gentle. The classic route runs right across them. And that's exactly where most people die. The explanation is boring. An even slope has nothing to show the eye. As long as you can see where you're going, it helps. The moment visibility disappears, the slope turns into a white field, with no top and no bottom, no edges, not a single point to fix on. You don't fall, you don't drop into a crevasse. You just keep walking at a steady, confident pace, in the wrong direction. The worst part of that trap is that it doesn't feel like anything. Your legs are working, your breathing is fine, your head is convinced everything's under control. Not a single signal tells you you're wrong. Nenad Ikonic, head of the Republika Srpska Mountain Rescue Service, sums the mountain up in a few words. It's essentially permanently below freezing. According to him, the winds up there blow at 80 to 100 kilometers an hour. And in wind like that, he says, your chances of surviving are very small. 80 kilometers an hour is the speed that knocks a person off their feet on flat ground. Now, put that at 5,000 meters at -20 with no landmarks. Shefik Sadikovic is a Bosnian climber who summited Elbrus in 2013. He describes something about this mountain you simply can't see from below, how fast the weather changes up there. And he explains the mechanics the way someone explains them when they've actually stood in it. Every expedition starts at around 1 in the morning. That's the standard. Leave in the dark so you can be back down before the weather turns in the afternoon. But a night start has a price. At night, you can't see the clouds. You walk by the stars in your headlamp, and you have no idea what's ahead. And if a cloud catches the group, in Sadakovic's words, the temperature drops from -13 to below -30 in 2 minutes. 2 minutes, not an hour, not half an hour. Just long enough to pull a second jacket out of your pack and realize it's already not enough. The second thing he talks about is acclimatization. His group spent 9 days on Elbrus. The scheme was simple. Every day climb about 800 meters, then drop back 400. The body gradually adapts to the thin air. 9 days for a few hours on the summit. Anyone who hasn't put that week in, Sadikovic says, will end up on his knees at 5,300 meters. And now, how people actually get up here. Cable car to 3,847, snowcat to 5,100. The infrastructure on Elbrus lets you skip those 9 days entirely. No rules broken, nothing forbidden. A man sits down to breakfast in the village below, and an hour later, he's standing at 5,000 meters, with a body that isn't ready for that altitude, and with no sign at all that anything is wrong, up to a certain point. On the 24th of July, the group from Zenica finished their acclimatization push to 4,500 meters and came back down. All that was left was to wait for nightfall. That same day, at around 3,800 meters, they ran into another Bosnian group, 6 climbers from Gako, Bileća, and Trebinje, that's Herzegovina, the south of the country. They had set out back on the 14th of July. First they climbed Mount Kazbek in Georgia, 5,054 meters, then crossed into Russia. They had tried to reach the hut at 4,040 meters on the 23rd, but the weather turned them back. They only made it on the 24th. And on the way up, they met their countrymen. Later, the Herzegovinians would describe how it went. A friendly word between fellow Bosnians turned into a conversation full of laughter. 2 Bosnian teams crossing paths by pure chance on the slope of a foreign mountain, thousands of kilometers from home. They wished each other a good climb and went their separate ways. One detail from that conversation stuck with the Herzegovinians. The Zenica team was planning to go for the summit that very night, at 1 in the morning. That evening, the Okanovic wrote on their page that everything had gone according to plan, that they were heading up during the night, that the biggest challenge of them all was ahead, and they asked everyone to keep their fingers crossed. They set off right on the minute, no delays. The weather at the start was normal, nothing that would make experienced people turn around in the first half hour. By morning, the wind had picked up from about 45 kilometers an hour to 70. By other accounts, the gusts overnight reached 80. Visibility dropped to practically zero. The group was moving as two rope teams. At some point, one of the climbers started getting badly chilled. The first rope team made the call to turn back. The right call, made at the right time, exactly what they teach on every mountain course out there. The second rope team pushed on. They covered another 100, maybe 150 meters, fixed a line on one section of the route, and climbed higher. From up there, they got a view of what was happening above. Above, it was worse. They turned around too. The first reports about this story said something completely different, so this has to be said plainly. Not one of the 7 reached the summit. The surviving group leader says so. The same thing follows from the Post. The Okanovich left a few hours before they set out. It's confirmed by the group they met, who saw the Zenica team at 3,800 meters that same day. And there isn't a word about the summit in the prosecutor's official statement. It says only that, on the 24th of July, the group set out on the climb, and the following evening they lost the route. Nobody reached the top. Both rope teams turned back on their own reading of the weather, without waiting for anyone, and without pushing it to the edge. A few hours later, 5 of the 7 would be dead. The descent turned out to be harder than the climb, and that's the part nobody factors in when they talk about decisions made in time. Going up, the group had the wind at their backs and their own crampon tracks to follow. Going down, they were into the wind, into white haze, on a slope where the tracks had already been buried. At around 5,100 meters, 2 of the climbers were in serious trouble. From that moment, the group could no longer move as a group. 2 of them couldn't walk. The other 5 couldn't leave them and couldn't carry them. At 5,000 meters. In a storm, a person can barely drag his own body. What happened to them over the next few hours isn't described by a single source. Not the survivors' statements, not the prosecutor's announcement, not the rescue reports. Between the turnaround and the distress call, there's a gap we know nothing about. At some point inside that gap, it became clear. The group was not going to get down under its own power. Kamal Vidimlich went down alone. He covered the ground from 5,100 meters to base camp through a blizzard, in wind that knocks you off your feet, in visibility where you can't see your own hands. Alone, without a partner, without a rope, on a slope where you lose your bearings in the first 100 meters. He made it. The call for help reached the rescuers at 9:21 in the evening. The group had set out on the route at 1 in the morning. By the time anyone knew about them, they had been on that slope for more than 20 hours, and almost all of it in the storm. 8 men from the Elbrus High Mountain Squad gathered in a matter of minutes and started up. The information they were carrying up with them was incomplete. They were told there were 6 people, the ones left up there after Vidimlich went down. How many of those 6 were still alive? Nobody down below could say. Later, 16 people would be involved in the operation, including local guides, but the first ones up the mountain were those 8. The conditions they got were exactly the same: night, blizzard, wind. The difference was that Vidimlich had come down a route he knew, following his own tracks, while they were going up toward people whose exact position nobody knew. They found Haris Adilovich on the way. He was heading down toward camp as the team was heading up. At around 1:30 in the morning, the rescuers reached the saddle. There they found 2 people dead. Albert Hadjiev, the deputy head of the squad, described the survivors' condition as extremely serious. Both climbers had severe frostbite. By that hour, there were 2 alive: Vidimlich, who had walked into camp himself, and Adilovich, picked up on the way. 2 dead, right there on the saddle. And 3 more, who were neither on the saddle nor along the line of the route. They would have to be found blind. 2 bodies had to be brought down from 5,300 meters. Work like that at that altitude is hard physical labor even in good weather. In a blizzard, in gale force gusts, every meter has to be taken one at a time. The rescuers worked their way down all night and all the following day. On the evening of the 26th of July, the bodies were brought to the Azau Meadow and handed over to the investigation team. The search for the other 3 had to be suspended. The weather left no choice. In that kind of visibility, looking for a person on the slope is pointless, and risking the squad itself is out of the question. They resumed the next morning at 5 o'clock. By the 27th of July, all 5 had been found: Meliha Chaushevich, Alma Okanovich, Denis Okanovic, Almir Krivdic, Nermin Talam. Of the 7 people who went up on the night of the 25th of July, 2 came back. What happened to the cat the Okanovics had carried with them for years, the one they named their page after, is unknown. Not the rescue reports, not a single official statement mentions her at all. They weren't the only ones going up that night. The 6 Herzegovinians who had parted ways with them at 3,800 meters a day earlier were climbing the same line into the same storm. At around 5,400 meters, they hit thick fog and wind up to 70 kilometers an hour. They were about 240 vertical meters from the summit, 2 hours of walking. After 11 days on the road, after Kazbek, after the attempt on the 23rd that the weather had killed, 240 meters, all 6 voted to abandon the climb. Unanimously. 240 meters is exactly the kind of distance people argue about for years afterwards. They came down to the hut at 4,040 meters, packed their gear, and drove to Terskol. They learned what had happened to the Zenica team in the morning, when they were already in Georgia. Another Bosnian group gave up their summit push in those same days. Both surviving groups were climbing with local guides. The Zenica team went up on their own, with no local guide. That was confirmed both by the survivors and by the rescuers working on the mountain. It isn't about preparation, and it isn't about gear. Both groups were fine on that. In the end, both of them turned around. The difference is the altitude where it happened, and how long the storm had already been going by that hour. Kanan Hrustanovic, head of the Zenica Mountain Rescue Service, would have gone on that expedition himself. A knee injury stopped him. He was also the first to confirm what the city already knew. All 5 of the dead were from Zenica. 2 of them worked under him. The cantonal hospital said goodbye to Miliha Chaushevich in a separate statement. It said she had left an indelible mark on the institution and that her untimely death was an irreplaceable loss. In October, they had written about her as a record breaker. In July, as a woman who had died. Bosnia and Herzegovina's foreign minister, Elmedin Konakovic, called it a great tragedy. He also said out loud what people usually don't say in the first days. After the first part of the job comes the second, bringing the dead home, and that part is very hard. The government of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina declared a day of mourning. Ivan Orlic, Bosnia's ambassador in Moscow, tried to explain to his countrymen what had actually happened on that mountain. He put it like this: the sky and the ground merge, visibility drops to nothing. And in a moment like that, he said, even experienced climbers lose their orientation. The 5 from Zenica were experienced climbers. That same July, Elbrus took 3 more people, and those deaths have nothing to do with the Bosnians. The 6th of July. A commercial group, 10 people, guides included. At 5,500 meters, just above the saddle, a 34-year-old member of the group suddenly fell seriously ill. He died on the spot. The guides were right there, but they couldn't save him. The cable cars were down for maintenance that day. They could only bring him down at night. The 11th of July. A 48-year-old citizen of Malaysia, one of 3 Malaysians on the expedition. A group of 4 was climbing with 2 guides, but according to the rescuers, the route hadn't been registered. They summited. He died on the descent at 4,900 meters. The 26th of July, 1321. From the saddle of Elbrus, from 5,300 meters, from the Red Fox hut, a request for help comes in. 2 Russians, one from the Stavropol region, one from the Tula region. They had registered their route. One of them died. The survivor was evacuated. They couldn't bring the dead man down that day. Blizzard and gale force wind. Now, line up the dates. At 1321, the squad wasn't at base and wasn't on the road. It was standing at exactly that altitude, bringing the Bosnians down and searching for the 3 they hadn't found yet. The call from the Red Fox hut came into people whose hands had already been full for 2 days. You won't find any of these 3 by name. The 34-year-old from St. Petersburg, his identity was never released. The 48-year-old Malaysian, never named by the Russian services, or by his own foreign ministry, or by his country's national agency. The man who died on the 26th where, details withheld until the investigation is complete. The mountain's annual statistics are made up of people whose names nobody will ever learn except their families. When one mountain collects that many dead in a single month, you want to find a reason, a common mistake, the thing they all got wrong. So here's July, date by date, case by case. On the 6th of July, the group had guides, professionals right there in the team. It didn't help. On the 11th, there were guides too, 2 for 4 people. According to the rescuers, there was no registration. It didn't help. On the night of the 25th, 7 experienced people went up, 2 of them professional mountain rescuers. There was no local guide. It didn't help. On the 26th, there was registration and a partner right there. It didn't help. People died in a commercial group of 10. They died in a group of 4. They died in a group of 7. They died in a pair. They died at 5,500, at 4,900, at 5,100, at 5,300. There's no pattern. There are only 2 things that repeat in every single case, without exception: altitude above 5,000 meters, and the weather. And there's a third thing, which is harder to talk about, because you can't verify it after the fact, and you can't put it in a report: the moment when the decision was made to turn back. The 6 Herzegovinians turned around at 5,400 and drove away alive. The 7 from Zenica turned around higher up the slope, and several hours later, and 2 came home. Everything you can plan for in advance: gear, experience, registration, guiding, gave no guarantee at all on this mountain in July 2026. Although you can test that rule on another season, not July and not Bosnian, September 2021, the tail end of the season. A commercial tour, nothing improvised. The operator put together a group of 16, people from Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, Tyumen, Yakutsk, Tolyatti, Novorossiysk, Perm. The route was registered in advance properly. On paper, that group had everything. 4 instructor guides were assigned to them. Investigators would later establish that a route of that category required at least 6. On the evening of the 23rd of September, the group called for help from 5,400 meters. According to the rescuers, gusts were hitting 40 to 70 meters per second. That's not a typo. Meters per second. The top of that range is over 250 kilometers an hour. Part of the group died on the descent before evacuation reached them. The causes given were frostbite and pulmonary edema. Elena Nesterova from St. Petersburg was 32 years old. She died in the arms of her husband Artyom. He survived. 5 people died in total. 11 ended up in hospital. A few years later, the court delivered its verdict. The organizer of the climb got 5 years and 7 months in prison. The instructors got sentences starting at 3 years and 2 months. 20 people on the mountain, 4 professional guides, a registered route, a company that had been doing this for years, 5 dead, the same number as in July 2026. That group was led by the guide Ilya Chuikov. Working nearby in those days was Ksenia Kotliar, a guide with another group, who went out onto the slope at the same time he did. She was the one who told the backstory of that push. By her account, the leaders of that group knew the forecast was bad. And according to that same version, they went for the summit anyway, betting they'd make it back in one piece. Kotliar made it. Chuikov didn't. The leadership of the Elbrus rescue squad would later state that the guides made the decision to descend far too late. 5 years on, the same explanations are being given in Bosnia in a different language. Haris Adilovic, one of the 2 survivors from Zenica, named the main cause of the tragedy as an incorrect weather forecast. He stresses that every member of the team was experienced, that climbers in Bosnia train practically every weekend, and that this was definitely not about inadequate preparation. Nenad Ikonic, head of the Republika Srpska mountain rescuers, says the opposite. According to him, the forecast for that night was very unfavorable. Strong gusts had been announced. The same argument, word for word, just with different people in it. The forecast lied, or the forecast wasn't listened to. We have no way of establishing which of them is right. We weren't on that mountain on the 25th of July, and we didn't see what data was in front of those 7 people at 1 in the morning. We know only one thing. That same night, on that same mountain, in that same wind, 2 other groups turned around earlier, and they went home.